Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
There are moments in history when ink and parchment seem to breathe, when faded letters whisper across centuries, carrying voices that refuse to be silenced by time. In the highlands of Ethiopia, where mountains rise like stone guardians over ancient valleys and monasteries cling to cliffs as if suspended between heaven and earth, such moments are not rare. Here, in dimly lit chambers scented with incense and beeswax, lie manuscripts that have watched empires rise and fall, that have outlived kings and kingdoms, and that continue to speak in symbols, patterns, and sacred silences. These manuscripts are not merely books. They are codes of memory, identity, and divine mystery. To read them is not only to read words, but to decode layers of meaning carefully concealed within sacred art, structure, language, and ritual. Ethiopia's manuscript tradition is among the oldest continuous literary cultures in the world. Long before Europe emerged from the shadows of the early Middle Ages, Ethiopian scribes were copying biblical texts, theological treatises, royal chronicles, magical scrolls, and philosophical reflections in Guizi, a classical language now preserved mainly in liturgy. Unlike many ancient cultures whose texts vanished through conquest or neglect, Ethiopia maintained an unbroken chain of manuscript production for more than 15 centuries. This continuity did not merely preserve content. It preserved a unique method of embedding meaning within form, a tradition where the message was often as much in how something was written and illustrated as in what was written. One cannot approach Ethiopian manuscripts without first acknowledging their sacred status. In Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the written word is not a passive carrier of information, but a living vessel of divine presence. A manuscript is treated almost as a sacred body, kissed, anointed, wrapped in cloth, and guarded with reverence. This spiritual understanding shaped how messages were encoded within them. When a text is believed to mediate between heaven and earth, concealment becomes not a trick but a form of protection, ensuring that divine knowledge is approached with humility and preparation rather than casual curiosity. One of the most striking features of Ethiopian manuscripts is their use of visual symbolism. Illuminations are not decorative in the Western sense. They are theological statements rendered in color and line. Saints, angels, kings, and prophets appear not as realistic portraits, but as symbolic presences, their proportions, colors, and gestures carefully chosen. A figure larger than others signifies spiritual authority rather than physical size. Eyes are often wide and unblinking, conveying divine vigilance rather than human expression. Colors are never random. Red speaks of sacrifice and martyrdom, blue of heavenly mystery, gold of divine glory, and green of resurrection and life. These colors function as a visual code, conveying messages that transcend language and could be read even by the illiterate. Beyond imagery, Ethiopian manuscripts conceal meaning in structure itself. The layout of a page, the number of columns, the spacing of verses, and even the alignment of words often follow symbolic patterns. Some manuscripts organize text in triads or sevens, numbers deeply significant in biblical cosmology. 3 reflects the divine completeness, while 7 signifies sacred time and cosmic order. When a manuscript arranges a prayer into 7 segments or repeats a phrase 3 times, it is embedding theology within architecture. The reader is not merely absorbing content but participating physically in a symbolic universe. Language itself becomes a vehicle for concealment. Guizi, the classical Ethiopian liturgical language, is not simply a means of communication but a sacred code. Even when Amharic and other Ethiopian languages became dominant in daily life, Guizi remained the language of scripture and liturgy. This separation between sacred and spoken language created a natural barrier, ensuring that only those trained in religious tradition could fully access the deeper layers of meaning. Words in Guizi often carry multiple semantic layers, allowing a single sentence to operate on historical, moral, and mystical levels simultaneously. Some Ethiopian texts go further, embedding cryptic expressions, allusions, and symbolic references that can only be understood through knowledge of other scriptures or oral traditions. A passage might echo a verse from Enoch, Jubilees, or the Psalms, linking different books through invisible threads. This intertextual weaving creates a network of hidden messages across manuscripts, turning the entire Ethiopian canon into a living web of coded meaning rather than a collection of isolated texts. The Book of Enoch, preserved uniquely in Ethiopia's biblical canon, exemplifies this multi-layered communication. On its surface, Enoch recounts visions of angels, cosmic journeys, and divine judgment. Beneath this narrative, however, lie encoded reflections on political authority, priestly legitimacy, and resistance to corruption. Many scholars now believe that parts of Enoch were written in response to specific historical crises within ancient Judaism, particularly conflicts over temple leadership and foreign domination. By embedding political critique within apocalyptic vision, the authors concealed messages of resistance within divine revelation, making them safer from censorship and persecution. Similarly, the Keber Nagast, Ethiopia's national epic, operates as a coded political theology. Ostensibly a story about the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, it is also a justification of Ethiopian kingship and independence. By claiming descent from Solomon through Menelik I, the Ethiopian monarchy asserted divine legitimacy independent of Roman, Byzantine, or later European authority. The text encodes political sovereignty within sacred history, transforming national identity into a theological mandate. Another fascinating dimension of Ethiopian hidden codes lies in magical scrolls, often misunderstood by outsiders as mere superstition. These scrolls, written on parchment and worn on the body or hung in homes, contain prayers, biblical verses, angelic names, and mysterious symbols. Their purpose is protection, healing, and spiritual balance. But their design is itself a form of coded knowledge. The placement of names, the direction of writing, and the combination of symbols follow specific traditions passed down orally among scribes and priests. To the uninitiated, they appear chaotic or decorative. To the trained eye, they are precise spiritual technologies encoding ritual power and cosmological knowledge. Names play a crucial role in this tradition. Ethiopian manuscripts often emphasize divine and angelic names not merely as labels, but as carriers of power. The belief that knowing and writing a name correctly grants authority over spiritual forces echoes ancient Near Eastern and biblical traditions. Yet Ethiopian scribes took this further, often arranging names in patterns or sequences that themselves formed protective or revelatory codes. These patterns were not explained openly, but transmitted through apprenticeship and initiation. Numerology is another hidden language woven into Ethiopian manuscripts. Certain numbers recur with deliberate intent. 40 appears repeatedly, symbolizing trial and purification, echoing the 40 days of the flood, Moses on Sinai, and Christ in the wilderness. 12 reflects divine governance, linked to tribes, apostles, and cosmic order. When a manuscript contains prayers repeated 12 times or a narrative structured around 40 episodes, it is not coincidence but symbolic architecture. These numbers communicate theological meaning beyond the literal text. The concealment of knowledge in Ethiopian manuscripts was also shaped by historical necessity. Ethiopia's long history of isolation, surrounded by hostile powers and religious rivals, fostered a culture of guarded transmission. Christian Ethiopia stood as a lone Christian kingdom in a largely Islamic region for centuries. Protecting religious identity was not merely spiritual, but political. Manuscripts became vessels of survival, encoding doctrines, rituals, and histories in forms that could endure conquest, censorship, and cultural erosion. This is particularly evident in Ethiopia's preservation of books rejected elsewhere. While Europe discarded texts like Enoch and Jubilees as apocryphal, Ethiopia retained them as scripture. This act itself can be seen as a form of cultural coding, a statement that Ethiopian Christianity was not subordinate to Roman or Byzantine definitions of orthodoxy. The manuscripts quietly declare theological independence, preserving alternative streams of ancient faith long suppressed elsewhere. The art of concealment also extends to silence. Ethiopian manuscripts often omit explicit explanations, assuming a reader already knows the interpretive tradition. This creates a sacred opacity, where meaning is not given but approached gradually through study, prayer, and initiation. In this sense, the hidden code is not always in what is written but in what is deliberately left unsaid. The rediscovery of Ethiopian manuscripts by European scholars in the 18th and 19th centuries revealed just how much knowledge had been quietly preserved. Explorers like James Bruce returned with manuscripts that stunned European academia, including complete versions of the Book of Enoch previously thought lost. Scholars such as Hiob Ludolf and August Dillman devoted their lives to cataloging and translating these texts, slowly unveiling a world of thought far older and more complex than many had imagined. Modern technologies have deepened this revelation. Multispectral imaging has uncovered erased text beneath visible writing, revealing palimpsests where older manuscripts were scraped and reused due to scarcity of parchment. In these hidden layers, scholars have found lost hymns, prayers, and biblical passages, literally concealed beneath newer writings. Ethiopia's manuscripts thus contain not just symbolic codes but physical ones, where older messages sleep beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. Yet even as technology unveils these secrets, much remains hidden by design. Some monasteries still restrict access to certain manuscripts, believing that sacred knowledge must be protected from misuse or misunderstanding. This echoes the ancient belief that divine wisdom is not meant for casual consumption, but for those prepared spiritually and intellectually to receive it. Ethiopia's hidden codes are not merely relics of past. They continue to shape contemporary Ethiopian spirituality. Liturgical chants follow melodic patterns believed to mirror heavenly harmony. Church dances embody cosmic movements. Even today, the faithful experience their religious tradition as something layered, symbolic, and deeply encoded, where surface meaning opens into spiritual depth through ritual and contemplation. In a world increasingly obsessed with speed and transparency, Ethiopia's manuscript tradition offers a different vision of knowledge, one that honors patience, mystery, and reverence. It reminds us that not all truths are meant to be shouted, that some are meant to be whispered through centuries, carried by ink, color, rhythm, and silence. Ethiopia's hidden code is not a single secret waiting to be cracked, but a philosophy of sacred communication, a belief that truth is best preserved when it is woven into beauty, ritual, and layered meaning. Its manuscripts are not puzzles to be solved once and for all, but living texts that reveal more the longer one dwells with them. In their faded pages lies a quiet testimony to humanity's longing to preserve what matters most, not merely by writing it down, but by embedding it so deeply within culture, art, and devotion that time itself becomes part of the message. Ethiopia did not merely write history. It encoded it, safeguarded it, and entrusted it to generations yet unborn, inviting them not simply to read, but to decipher, reflect, and wonder.